Every Night is Game Night Preview Series number 5, Role Player with Keith Matejka.
Hey.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, we are back. We just dropped the preview series just a couple days ago, but we found out just today, as we're recording this, that Role Player is back on Kickstarter, the reprint, and a new expansion, brand new hot content for you. So we had to have the creator of this kind of game that shot out of nowhere and is now beloved within the solo community. So welcome, Keith, to the podcast.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So let's get right into talking about yourself as a game designer, talking about your company, very, very small company that has made a pretty big splash, both in the solo community and in the gamer community.
Yeah, so my company, Thunderworks Games, is just me. It's kind of a company of one. So I kind of started out wanting to, like a lot of people who play games, at some point, I think there's a lot of people that decide to try their hand at design. It's like you play all these great games and you're like, this doesn't seem that hard. Like, I could do this, or you get a good idea. And at some point, I just me and a couple of buddies say, we play all these games. Let's try to design some. So we kind of came up with some initial ideas and started developing a process for taking an idea and making it a playable thing and going through a playtesting process. And I just kind of stuck with it, to be honest. So the first game I did was a game called Bullfrogs, which I successfully kickstarted and was a success for me. But it's kind of a smaller card and tokens kind of game.
But with a solo mode, which is important for our community.
Yeah, so the solo mode for Bullfrogs was kind of an afterthought, as similar to the way Role Player was. I'm not a huge solo gamer. I've done some in the past, played some back in the day, some Arkham Horror solo, and more recently the Arkham Horror card game. But I'm not a huge solo gamer, but I've played a fair share of them, and there was some demand from the community, like, hey, what would a solo version of this look like? And so then I just kind of attacked it. And the solo version of Bullfrogs has a robot AI that's controlled by a pair of dice, and you spend your time kind of trying to. It's like this guy bumbling around, and you're like trying to manipulate him so that he doesn't get too many points. And I really enjoyed working on that, and that kind of set the groundwork for what I would end up doing for the solo mode in Role Player.
All right, and let's get right into Role Player. That is, we're feeding the beast. That is what the people want to hear. But before we get into the Role Player expansion, which is what is kind of the main star of the Kickstarter now, let's talk a little bit about the base game Role Player, because Sure. It is super unique, and I'm sure you've talked about this in a lot of different places, but for our audience, talk about how you wanted to represent D&D, but not just D&D, but D&D character creation.
Yeah. So the idea was like a lightning in the bottle moment for me. It was like I had the idea just struck me. It's like I was playing a friend's prototype that was like a traditional role-playing game, and the character creation process, it was kind of fun to go through that, and in his game, and I thought to myself, what if like the whole game was just making characters?
Are you a big role player?
Not as much as I used to. I played a lot of D&D and Vampire and Shadowrun when I was in college, and that's one of the reasons why I started getting into board games, because I wanted to find kind of a shorter experience that I didn't have to. It wasn't as much work to kind of get everybody together, and it wasn't as rules heavy. But I'm a huge video game player. I've worked in my day job. I've worked in video games for over 15 years. And some of my favorite games are old school Ultima games or Wizardry or newer stuff like Skyrim and Oblivion and that kind of stuff, and that really have their it's really set in a Tolkien-esque traditional fantasy D&D style setting. And I remember making characters as I was a kid, and I remember I spent a lot of time in character creators in Skyrim and Oblivion and stuff, and I always liked that. So I thought I was like, what if I was going to make a game that was just about making characters? What would it be? And that it came together super fast after that. Obviously people remember rolling d6s to build their stats, and obviously it's got to be a dice. It has to be a big dice component here, and
it's
I don't
interesting.
know.
It's interesting. Sorry for interrupting, but it's not just rolling dice. Like if it was just rolling dice, like the old school second edition, roll 46 plus or minus one die or whatever it is, that wouldn't be much of a game. But you really took this theme and married it with. It feels like Kingsburg. It feels like Alien Frontiers, or these dice placement type games. So were those some of the things that you drew for inspiration, or was it from elsewhere?
I definitely like those games. I think Alien Frontiers I like quite a bit. Kingsburg is a good game as well. I don't know. Dice are always a cool thing, and manipulating them in different ways. But I wouldn't say I took directly from any of those titles. Yeah, it was interesting when I started working on the game. My thought process was I thought about Magic the Gathering, and I thought about Dominion, and it's like, to me, Dominion is the metagame for Magic the Gathering, like just kind of isolated. And my thought was like, what if I made, if role players the metagame for D&D is kind of, I was trying to kind of create this parallel there, and it felt like such an obvious thing to do. And I was like, I cannot believe no one has done this yet. So
it's funny because like it depends on who you ask. So some players are like it's almost like there's two different types of D&D players. The players that they just want to play and they just want to do the adventure and all that kind of stuff, and then the others that are character that they love creating the characters and looking at specs and all that kind of stuff. So it really does feel like, and I'm thinking of Julian in the One Player Guild also kind of talked about this a little bit. This is like, he just couldn't get into it. This is boring. I don't want to just roll a character,
right?
And I feel like, I don't know how much pushback have you gotten of that type where it's like, the character's not doing anything. I'm not adventuring. I'm not going anywhere. This is boring. Did you get that?
Yeah, during development, I got that all the time. But I was really adamant about kind of sticking to my vision of what the game was. My thought was like, after you finish playing Dominion, do you play a game with your Dominion deck afterwards? No, you put it back in the box. It's the same kind of idea.
That is definitely true. Like you don't get to do anything with your town,
right?
Or whatever you're doing in Dominion, it just kind of sits there and scores you a bunch of points, and then you put it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that is actually super interesting. Like Dominion Dominion plus dice is role player.
yeah.
Cool. All right. So then now we can kind of transition into the expansion. Now we're doing stuff. Now we're actually, I'll let you. I'm sure you have your own kind of spiel for it, so I'll let you describe some of the doing stuff parts that you introduced with the expansion.
Yeah, so the expansion is kind of it comes out of the things that people want. It's like I had my idea of what I wanted the game to be, and I made that, and then there's a lot of people that were kind of looking to do something with their character. And the other response that I've always kind of had when people ask about that is like, hey, how come I can't do anything with my character? I'm like, if you want to run around and fight monsters, there's a lot of games that do that. You can play Descent, you can play Mice and Mystics, you can play, all kinds of stuff.
Gloomhaven.
Yeah, whatever. And I was looking to do something different than that, and I think it was successful. And now it's like, well, the people want to fight monsters. That's cool. Let's figure out how to work that within the system, And I wanted to have the expansion kind of integrate from the beginning of the game. I didn't kind of just tack on some battle at the end. So that it came out to, I want a big monster to fight at the end, but I want you to have to kind of discover some things about it over the course of the game to do well. And that's usually at the expense of not developing your character as much. So I wanted to kind of create this balance between buying more stuff for your character and kind of getting ready for this big fight at the end. And then the minions came later. It was like, well, it kind of ran into there's ideas of like throwing monsters within the market deck that came up, so you could kind of buy cards or you could fight them within the market deck. And I tried a wide variety of things, and the other thing about role players is it's pretty deterministic. Like there's not a ton of randomness in the game. At least I don't feel there is.
Which is ironic for a dice game.
Right. Yeah. It's like you've got a 73 dice in the box, and like, you don't get to roll them that often. But
yes, like roll and think a lot.
Right. So I added these so I tried to do like a deterministic version of that combat because I thought that was kind of more in line with what the core game is. But in the end, I think just like D&D players and in general, to me it doesn't feel like combat in a board game unless I'm rolling a die. I don't know. There are diceless combat resolution systems out there, but I just I like that moment of rolling dice and comparing results, and it felt like playing D&D or Shadowrun or whatever. So I eventually moved to a dice resolution combat system, and then it almost kind of came to a component thing where like, all right, I'm including all these combat dice in the box, and you only roll them once at the end of the game. That doesn't make the amount of money it was going to take to make those dice and put them in the box, and you get to use them once didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I was like, we got to find another way to use these dice. So out came the minions. So now you can fight these smaller monsters in addition to the big monster, and then obviously you're doing that. You're generating experience points for killing these minions, which let you do a bunch of different things. Not only just helping you in the final battle to reroll dice or add more dice to your kind of your attack, but you can also use them to help develop your character to take more attribute actions. Because it's like you've got those moments where your board is full, almost full, and you really just need that last Constitution action. And here's a way to make that happen. I mean, you could do it with cards like Concentrate in the base game, but this is kind of a more universal way that all players can get access to that one or two extra attribute action during the game that they might really want.
Mm-hmm. So then you said that the monsters will be integrated into the market deck?
No, so that was an early idea. They aren't currently. So at the beginning of the game, they start face up. There's 6 different monsters, and then you've got these adventure cards, which they're called the obstacle, the location, and the attack cards. And you can look at those after you kill a minion, and they give you additional goals. And if you meet some of those goals at the end of the game, then you'll get to roll more dice against the big monster at the end. So the idea is that even on turn 1, you can be working towards doing well against the big monster at the end.
Mm. I think like thematically in World of Warcraft or in Skyrim, or the bigger role playing games, you always have your noob area at the start. So like you're basically in your underwear with like a wooden stick, and you're chopping down these hedgehogs or whatever. Was that kind of the effect of it? But the minion deck, where it's like these little tiny monsters that exist just for XP.
Yeah. I mean that was kind of the core idea. I mean, they're not like rats and green snakes and stuff. They're more, because I don't think those wouldn't look very good on the cards and stuff. But yeah, I mean,
fear the green snake.
But definitely, I was a big EverQuest player back in the day, and I take some inspiration from that as well. I remember many times fighting kobolds and stuff, just trying to grind levels out in that game, and kind of defeating the minions in role players kind of feels like that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Solo, does the expansion integrate some of the concepts that were in the base game for Solo?
Yeah, so kind of the Solo changes. So in the base game Solo, you roll what I call the enemy die, just kind of one die, depending on what card you bought. It kind of simulates like other players taking cards away from the market. In the expansion, there's an additional card in the market every turn, and then there's also the minion deck. So now instead of rolling one die, you're rolling 2 dice, 2 enemy dice. So it's a simple change. It's like now I just roll 2 dice instead of 1 die, and it's going to remove 2 things. It's either going to remove 2 cards from the market, or maybe it's going to cycle the minion so that maybe the one that you're trying to shoot for goes to the bottom of the deck, and there's a new one that's maybe not as suited for what you're trying to do, suited for your character to defeat. So that's kind of the only real change. Actually, that's not true. The other change is that there's a specific set of monster cards that are for the solo players that are harder. They have higher hit points. And the other, I guess, big change, I know solo gamers, at least from what my understanding is that people tend to like things that have win-loss conditions. And all the solo stuff I've designed before have kind of a high score ranking system. Mm-hmm. So for the expansion, I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of get a win-loss condition in there. So basically, in the solo game, at the end, when you fight against the big monster, if you don't hit his minimum hit points, you just lost the game. There's no scoring, there's no nothing. You just try again. And now with the expansion, if you at least defeat the monster at the lowest level, then you've got kind of a high score ranking similar to the base game.
I think that we have a lot of conversations about this in like the One Player Guild, the BGG, and the Facebook group, like what makes a good solo mode. I think that we don't mind the high score as long as there's a couple of other kind of levers and bells and whistles around it to make it more than just I'm going for a high score. So like that black dice does a pretty good job of simulating an enemy, what an enemy does to you. So like role player, there's not a lot of interaction. Some of the skills you interact, and, like you can copy somebody else's skills or whatever it is. But for the most part, the interaction is someone takes your card from the market or someone drafts your dice. And I think the black die does a good job of representing that opposition. So you have that element in there of, as long, that resistance to a high score. So like, I'm not just doing the same tactic I'm always doing. I'm changing tactics in response to this resistance. Now I can make the high score in response to this thing that's giving me resistance, which is, pretty cool. And then the other part is obviously, the win-loss condition. I think of a game like Clank, where Clank is a points game and whatever it is. But if you don't get out of the dungeon, then you just lose. And that actually made for a pretty good kind of solo variant what they had with the app. So it sounds like you have a lot of the elements of, really good solo design, even though you say you're not that much of a solo player.
Yeah, and this time around, I did a lot of blind playtesting with solo gamers, whereas with the original role player, that had not even occurred to me that something I should be doing. So yeah, I sent out copies for people to try and give feedback on that were giving kind of solo game specific feedback. So I was really kind of hoping to, appeal to making sure that the game still continues to appeal to solo gamers as well as kind of the multiplayer gamers.
Mm-hmm. Talking about that appeal, are you like I was surprised, to be honest with you, like role player, haha, kind of a, it's kind of okay. I get the pun and everything, and I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, okay, this game is, what really separates this game is worker placement, all that kind of stuff. But it was huge. Like I think the Kickstarter is for the 3rd printing of the game with no end in sight. Like, did this take you by surprise?
When I mentioned the lightning in the bottle, I came up with the idea, and I was like, I knew this was going to be awesome, So it's always kind of trying, but I found out that, I think it was a little bit of a hard sell for people at the beginning. It's like, making a character, why would that be fun? I was like, dude, just play the game. It seems like it's one of those games that you really have to at least play or have an open mind about when kind of taking a look at, because it's not like other games. And you look at the cover and it's kind of generic fantasy, and it's got the pun, and some people think the pun is fun, and other people groan. I think it's like, I don't know, it's like one of those games. there's a lot of games that I see on the shelf when I look at it, like I immediately think I know how it plays and I know if I'm going to like it or not. Whereas in this game, like kind of defies a lot of those prejudgments, and it kind of has this generic look about it. But I was always hoping it would be awesome. You know, it would be well received, and I was really happy with everyone that I play tested with. Said it was great, and obviously I thought it was great. I still continue to download and play it all the time. And after you've played something 200, 300 times, if it still is you find it captivating and intriguing and compelling, then I feel like you got something there. So I think it's been. The original Kickstarter for the base game, did fairly well, but it wasn't like, gangbusters. And ever since then, I've been struggling to kind of keep it in print, and that's been great. It's great to have the demand there. It's not great that I have people out there that want to play my game that can't get a hold of it. That breaks my heart.
It sounds like you're doing the best you can with that. I believe that the original plan for this Kickstarter was not to include a reprint, but then there's a reprint, right?
Yeah. So the Kickstarter was kind of supposed to be. So the third print run is already on its way. So that is supposed to actually get on a boat from China this week. So the Kickstarter is basically for the expansion, and then it's going to let me print some more copies of the base game. And then depending on like what final numbers are, I'll figure out like where the split is going to be between those things, between how many base game and how many expansion on the printing and stuff. But cool. It all, being a one-person company with limited capital, it's hard to be able to make those big print runs just because it takes so much money, and the turnaround is slow. I mean, it takes like 4 months after I press the go button just to say, hey, print the thing you already printed, and it takes 4 months for that to turn around, and then it takes a month to get through into distribution and a month for me to get paid through that. So I mean, it might be 5-6 months before I see that money back again and I can press the go button again. So it just takes capital that a small guy like me just doesn't have access to.
Mm-hmm. Not to peek too far under the hood of the business side of it, but has this game blown up to the point where you would consider partnering with a distributor, partnering with a bigger company to get it distributed, or is this your baby? You're gonna do what you can with it.
I mean, I'm always open to business relationships. My first game, Bullfrogs, I licensed it to Renegade, and they ended up doing the second printing of it. And if that was an option to do some kind of co-publishing deal so that I could get more copies out there faster, just to help meet demand and help build the enthusiasm for it. I mean, that's definitely something I'm interested in.
All right, so hopefully some publishers are listening. So
it's also something I haven't been actively pursuing either. So I guess there's that.
Okay. So I reviewed the game on our podcast a couple of weeks ago. I loved it. I'm not just saying that because you're here, but right. I really did enjoy the game. I was a guy when I was younger. I played 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, and every edition I was the guy that made a whole bunch of characters that did nothing. But it was just fun to explore the feats and all that kind of stuff, and explore the items and all that kind of thing. I love that part of the game, and I think you did it really well. I did have 2 criticisms that I noticed were in the community itself. One you mentioned, which was the graphic design. So that cover is pretty bland. Like you said, it's pretty generic fantasy. Like, was there a thought of mixing that up a little bit? Like, I don't know, like jazzing it up, or maybe not, maybe like a Shadowrun thing, or, changing up the fantasy of it? Or was that the vision that you had of the game in your head?
Well, to be clear, I think the graphic design of the game is cool, and I mean, and John Ariosa on the illustrations did a really good job. But I kind of wanted it to be generic, so it's like, this is not D&D. This is, but maybe it could be. It's not Pathfinder, but maybe it could be. It's like, I didn't want it to look like any other specific game, but I wanted it to be kind of cool and generic enough that the player can imagine themselves as those characters instead of like saying, "Hey, that's a cool guy," I would rather it be, "Hey, that's a character that I could be," kind of thing. Um,
So it's like in I think the Dragon Quest games, the main character never talks. It's or the video games are like role playing
yeah,
games where the main character doesn't talk, so that you can kind of mentally put yourself into the main character's shoes and it's everybody else talking. Is that kind of a similar approach?
yeah, that's the same idea. Um,
Okay,
so yeah,
cool. So the other thing, and I notice a lot of people are kind of mentioning this, is the price of role player. So at MSRP's for $59.95,
yeah,
and the Kickstarter, if you want both, I think it's like, what is it, $80 to get the expansion and the base game.
89, I think.
So yeah, $89. So you're talking $90 for a
Yeah.
quote unquote dice game. So
Well,
right,
sure.
so I think so the game does not have a board, and I think that gamers are used to, if they're gonna spend that money, they're gonna get a board game. They're gonna get a Cry Havoc, a Terraforming Mars, the something with that a lot of players can sit around. This game does not have that. As a matter of fact, you can print and play this game. And you offer that, right? I think that's part
Yeah.
of the package. Like, you can get print and play files before the game ships. So it's a lot of gamers are struggling with the idea that a game that's a quote unquote dice game that you can print and play is the money that it is. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I manufacture with Panda. They're definitely one of the highest quality board game manufacturers out there, and you also kind of pay for that as well. One of the things that I want that's important to me is to making sure that people know the games coming out with the Thunderworks Games logo on it are the components are high quality, and it's just a simple. It's just the economics of it. I mean, 73 dice to put in a box is expensive. I mean, they're not custom. They don't have custom designs on them, which was intentional to really try to harken back to people's experience playing role playing games, because those are the kind of dice that people use, playing those games. But that hunk of plastic is pricey, and the weight of it also contributes to all the cost to move these things around the world via boxes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just it's an economic thing. So in general, there's a price ratio that's kind of generally accepted of like a manufacturing cost to MSRP is usually a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 6 ratio. Just because there's so many people along the way that get their cut, So retailers get their games at 45 to 55% off. The distributor gets their 5 to 10%, and then Kickstarter gets their percentage, and then just shipping these things around the world costs money. So even at the $60 MSRP, I'm not making a lot of money on these things. It's basically what it boils down to. And my print runs have been smaller. It's I'm not printing 10,000 units, mainly because I can't afford to. And the backing, at least on the initial game, didn't indicate that demand was there. So smaller print runs mean you're paying more per copy, because you don't get the economies of scale. And honestly, most of the economies of scale really kick in on printed materials, like boards and cards, whereas you don't really see that as much on things like dice. So.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of that? Like, this idea that Role Player is a quote unquote dice game, because people will say that, and it's almost like they have it a lot. I feel like a lot of the criticism of, or whatever people saying, is an expectation thing. So like, there's a mental category of dice game, and they're used to paying X amount for a dice game. Whereas
Sure.
a board game, they're used to, maybe a little bit more, and then a miniatures game, obviously a little bit, more of that. So Do you feel like that's at play a little bit, like people's expectations?
Potentially. I mean, I don't really. I mean, there's a lot of dice in the box, but I rarely call it a dice game. I mean, because to me, dice games are very luck focused, and they're traditionally shorter, and they have a small number of components. I mean, whether you're looking at something more mainstream like LCR, or something more, in the gamer world like Zombie Dice or something like that. Those are small dice games, and they just don't have the same components that Role Player does.
Yeah, not a lot of games I know have 72 dice in the box.
Yeah, I think Dwarven Forge, I think, is like the only other game that I can think of that does. I mean, Sangrata, which is also another dice manipulation game that came out in the last couple months, which was also on Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. They were able to pull off an MSRP of $40, which is pretty significantly lower than Role Player. And I definitely looked at that game and I'm like, how are they pulling this off? Because it would be nice to be able to offer it for a lower price. It makes it more accessible for more players. I mean, because I'm using full 16 millimeter dice versus the 12 millimeter or even the 14 millimeter that are in Dead of Winter or something like that. That's definitely a price increase. And to me, it was important to use 16 millimeters because that's what I played when I played D&D. That's what I had. I don't really like rolling baby dice, so I wanted to use. I don't have baby hands. I don't want to roll baby dice. So,
spoken like a true Wisconsin native.
Yeah. So, I mean, people can label it whatever they want. It's like that. Whatever their preconceived notions of what a dice game versus a card game versus a board game is, I feel like I can't really control that. And I just wanted to make the game I wanted to make, and I was just hoping that everybody else was going to think it was as cool as I think it is.
Well, you're at about 150% funding on day one with no end in sight, so I think that the gamer community on the whole is pretty happy with the game. So that is a credit to you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
So is there anything else that you want to say about the Kickstarter, about Role Player, contacting you, all that kind of stuff?
I mean, you can find me on. I don't have. The Kickstarters have been a huge success. It's been a roller coaster this first day, and this is surprising and super exciting, and also very stressful. Running a Kickstarter is a stressful thing. And I'm just excited that the people are into it. And I mean, people can always contact me. I'm on Twitter at Thunderworks, GAME, or without the E at the end because I ran out of characters. And you can contact me on my website or Facebook or whatever. I'm pretty accessible, and I answer people's questions and comments and emails all the time.
You definitely have a good reputation for customer service that I've read. So people were always saying, "Oh, just email Keith if you have a problem with the game, and he'll hook you up, and he's really friendly." So yeah, that's really that the word is out there that you're definitely available.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's one of the awesome things about the community. I mean, I think it's a relatively small community, and everybody kind of knows each other. And I just look at everything from a perspective of if I was that gamer, it's like, dude, I remember I opened up my copy of Chaos in the Old World, and the dial was punched wrong, and I was like, man, that sucks. You spent $60 on this game, and you can't even play it. This is, and then. I don't want to, you go through that process of contacting them and going, you get the runaround and you don't get responses as fast as you want because you're mad in that moment that you spend money on this thing and I don't know, I want to make sure that other people don't feel that way about my games, Mm-hmm. So I try to just treat people the way I would want to be treated, and I think, I don't know, I think just a little bit of foresight and a little bit of kindness can go a long way.
Definitely. So, yeah, I mean, and the numbers tell the story. At the end of the day, people love it on Role Player. Do you have anything else new coming down the pike? Or is it just, let's get Role Player right, and then you'll work on new stuff later?
Yeah, I got all kinds of stuff in the pipe. So, I briefly mentioned before, I worked on a solo version of Herbaceous for for Pencil First Games at Overwater Baraf, and that's Steve Finn's game and Beth Sobel on art, and we're working on a new game together, and I'm working on the solo version for that one as well. That one's called Sunset Over Water. And I'm working on a new 2-player asymmetrical game that actually Ed at Pencil First is going to publish, tentatively called Skulk Hollow. It's basically, if you took, I don't know if you know video games, but if you took Lord of the Rings and Shadows of the Colossus and mashed them into one game, that's what it is.
Oh, Shadow of the Colossus is one of my personal favorites. Are you kidding me? Like 12 bosses, that's the whole game? Yeah.
There's a whole lot of Shadows of the Colossus in it. So
you did way too much riding on the horse. Like there was a lot of time, 20 minutes I'd be riding on that thing and looking for the stupid big bad guy. That they could have cut that out a little bit, but for the most part, the boss battles were awesome.
Well, there's no horse riding in my game, so solve that problem.
Right. Well,
and then
okay, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, there's a couple more things I got coming down the pipe. I'm working on a game with Brett Myers. He's got a game called Dual Powers Revolution 1917, which is a 2-player kind of deduction area control game about Russia in 1917. 45 minutes. It's a cool little game, and he's also another local Madison guy, so it's kind of fun to work together. And then there's another game that's probably you'll see into next year, that is kind of a light worker placement game which is another fantasy theme, but you're kind of it's in a dungeon, but instead of playing the heroes, you're playing as the bad guys, and you have a gang of orcs or trolls, and you're kind of vying for power within the prison of the dungeon. So keep an eye out for that.
And you're doing all that around running a Kickstarter for a big game.
Yeah.
So that is awesome, man. That is great. You're working really hard, and a lot of good stuff is coming out for us. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed being on the podcast, and I hope that the audience enjoyed listening to us. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, man.
Oh, sure. So that'll do it for this preview series episode. Keith was great. We are on the first day of the launch, and I emailed him. I said, come on and talk about the thing, and he's like, yeah, let's do it. And that just says, a lot about his responsiveness. So, and I hope you guys, learned a lot about the Kickstarter. And like with everything in the series, the point of this series is to give you guys as informed an opinion as possible. So I really hope that a lot of your questions were answered about the Kickstarter, and you can make an informed decision about whether you want to back or not back or whatever it is. So that'll wrap it up for another episode. Until next time, later everybody.